Dirty and crying farmer kicked off crowded plane. What would you do if you were denied boarding on a plane for being dirty, without knowing that you're the heir to the airline itself? Don't miss this video. A farmer left everything behind to try to save her son, but ended up revealing a secret that left the entire crew speechless. Subscribe now and find out how a humble woman became the center of the biggest corporate scandal of the year. Denver International Airport was buzzing with the frantic activity of a Wednesday afternoon. Delayed flights, impatient families, hurried executives, and the constant metallic voice of the loudspeakers announcing departures and arrivals. Among that ordered chaos, one figure was completely out of place. Martha Thornton, in her 60s, moved through the gleaming corridors of the airport, leaving a trail of dirt in her wake. Her sun-weathered face showed deep furrows, witnesses to a life under the relentless Arizona climate. Her rough, calloused hands firmly gripped a crumpled ticket and a yellow document that she jealously guarded in a worn plastic envelope. "Please, ma'am, you need to clean up before boarding," said a young female employee, trying to be kind but firm. Martha looked at her with reddened eyes. She had been crying for hours, ever since she received that urgent call that forced her to abandon her Sunrise Ranch for the first time in 15 years. "I don't have time, sweetheart," she replied with a broken but determined voice. "That plane can't leave without me." The employee sighed, aware that she was facing one of those impossible situations. The older woman was literally covered in reddish soil. Her skirt, her blouse, and even part of her face and hair showed that she had been working the land moments before arriving at the airport. "I understand your urgency, but these are airline regulations. The other passengers—" "My son is in the hospital," Martha interrupted with eyes filling with tears again. "They called me 5 hours ago. I left everything as it was. I couldn't even change, please." The young employee, Sarah Foster, hesitated. In her 3 years working for Sun Airlines, she had never faced a similar situation. However, the rules were clear, and she couldn't risk losing her job. "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Thornton, but I'll have to ask you to at least wash up a bit in the restroom before boarding." "The flight to Dallas leaves in 40 minutes. You have enough time." Martha nodded in defeat and headed toward the restrooms. She tried to clean herself as best she could, but the soil was so embedded in her skin and clothes that she barely managed to improve her appearance. When she returned, Sarah looked at her with concern. "I did what I could," Martha said with dignity. The young woman nodded, stamping her boarding pass with an understanding smile. Martha moved toward the security line, where she again received looks of disapproval. The guards examined her with special attention, as if this older woman could represent some kind of threat. Time was running out. 20 minutes until takeoff when she finally reached the boarding area. The other passengers, mostly executives, looked at her with barely disguised disgust. Martha sat in a corner, clinging to her bag and that document protected in plastic. Robert Mitchell, the head flight attendant for the Dallas-bound flight, observed the situation from the boarding gate. He saw the older woman isolated from the rest, noticed her swollen eyes, the dirt on her clothes, and her evident distress. He checked his watch. It was time to begin boarding. When they called by groups, Martha was the last to stand up. She waited patiently for her turn, ignoring the looks and whispers around her. Finally, she extended her boarding pass to Robert. "Welcome to Sun Airlines, ma'am," he said with professional kindness, but then noticed Martha's condition and his expression changed. "Excuse me, but—" "They already cleared me at security," she anticipated, knowing what was coming. "Please, young man, my son." Robert felt the weight of responsibility. The airline's policies were strict regarding passengers' hygiene and appearance. He discreetly called his supervisor on the radio while asking Martha to wait a moment. Thomas Walker, the boarding supervisor, arrived quickly and assessed the situation with a frown. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we cannot allow you to board in these conditions," he stated bluntly. "Other passengers have already filed anticipated complaints." "Complaints?" asked Martha, incredulous. "I haven't even boarded the plane yet." "Precisely, we want to avoid bigger problems," Thomas replied. "We offer to change your ticket for tomorrow's flight at no additional cost." "I can't wait until, tomorrow," exclaimed Martha, and the tears she had been holding back began to flow again. "My son Jack is in the hospital. I don't know how much time." Her words hung in the air. Passengers, still waiting to board, observed the scene with a mixture of discomfort and curiosity. "I'm very sorry," insisted Thomas, "but our decision is final." It was then that Martha, with unexpected dignity, took the yellow document from its plastic protector. She held it out to Thomas without saying a word. "What is this?" he asked impatiently, taking the paper with disinterest. As his eyes scanned the content, his expression completely transformed. The color drained from his face. The document was an original ownership certificate, dated 1956, with the name of Richard Thornton as founder and majority owner of National Air Transport, the company that decades later, after mergers and acquisitions, would become Sun Airlines. Thomas looked up, incredulous. "You are?" "I'm Martha Thornton," she confirmed simply. "Richard was my father. I've never liked using his name to get favors, but today I have no choice. My son needs me." A deathly silence spread through the boarding area. Robert, the flight attendant, watched the scene in astonishment. Thomas swallowed hard and, in a gesture unthinkable minutes before, slightly bowed his head. "Of course, Mrs. Thornton," he said in a barely audible voice. "Allow me to escort you personally on board." Martha put the document away with the same care with which she had taken it out. She followed Thomas down the jetway while drying her tears with a cloth handkerchief. On the plane, the news had spread like wildfire among the crew. Captain David Rodriguez was waiting on his feet next to the cockpit door. When Martha appeared, he did something that left the already boarded passengers open-mouthed. He respectfully bowed to her. "It's an honor to have you with us, Mrs. Thornton," he said sincerely. "Your father was a legend in American aviation. We'll do everything possible to get you quickly to your son." Martha nodded, moved by that unexpected gesture. As she moved toward her seat, she felt the curious gazes of the other passengers, so different from the looks of contempt she had received before. What no one knew was that Martha Thornton's story was just beginning to unfold. Behind that woman of humble appearance and hands calloused by working the land, secrets were hidden that would forever change the fate of Sun Airlines, and of all, those who had judged only by what they saw on the surface. The flight proceeded with a mixture of curiosity and respect toward that woman, who had gone from being an intruder covered in dirt to becoming a kind of living legend. Martha remained silent for almost the entire journey, with her gaze lost in the clouds, thinking about her son Jack and how life took unexpected turns. Beside her sat Edward Thompson, an executive of an important telecommunications company who had been one of those who complained in advance about the presence of that unkempt woman. Now, uncomfortable about his previous behavior, he tried to start a conversation. "Excuse my boldness, Mrs. Thornton, but I didn't know who you were," he finally said, breaking the silence. Martha looked at him with tired but dignified eyes. "You had no reason to know," she replied simply. "But you also had no reason to judge me without knowing me." Edward nodded, ashamed. He had been traveling weekly for work for 10 years and had developed a certain contempt for those he considered problematic passengers. He had never stopped to think about the personal circumstances that might be hidden behind each traveler. "You're right," he admitted. "Sometimes we forget that behind each person is a complete story." Martha smiled slightly, appreciating his honesty. "My story is simple, young man. I married very young to the manager of one of my father's properties. Against all predictions, it was a happy marriage. We had only one son, Jack. When my husband passed away 15 years ago, I decided to distance myself from everything and dedicate myself only to working the land on our ranch." "And your father?" "The founder of the airline," Edward asked with genuine interest. Martha's face darkened slightly. "My father and I grew apart when I got married. He wanted me to marry someone of his social position, not a simple farm manager. Over time, he reconciled with my decision, but it was never the same. When he passed away, he left most of his shares to various foundations and charitable organizations. To me, he left the Sunrise Ranch and a small percentage of shares that I've never bothered to claim." "You never claimed your inheritance?" asked Edward, incredulous. "I didn't need more than what I had," she replied naturally. "My husband taught me to love the land, and after his departure, working it became my consolation." The flight attendant approached to announce they would soon be landing in Dallas. Martha put the document back in her bag and prepared for descent. Upon landing, Martha was surprised by completely different treatment. Captain David Rodriguez personally escorted her to the terminal, where an airline representative was already waiting to assist her. "Mrs. Thornton, I'm Amanda Turner, Director of Public Relations for Sun Air Lines in Dallas," introduced an elegant woman in her 40s. "We've been informed of your arrival, and I'd like to offer you transportation to the hospital." Martha, overwhelmed by that preferential treatment she had never sought, nodded gratefully. "I just want to get to my son quickly," she said in a broken voice. "He's at Memorial Hospital." During the ride in the company's luxury car, Amanda tried to disguise her professional curiosity. That humble woman was technically the daughter of the founder of the company she worked for, someone who could have significant power if she decided to exercise it. "May I ask what happened to your son?" Amanda inquired tactfully. "An accident." "On the ranch," replied Martha, pressing her bag against her chest. "A farming machine. I don't have details. They called me hours ago saying he was in serious condition, that I should come immediately." Amanda nodded understandingly, while in her mind more corporate questions began to form. Would this woman know that the shares the captain had mentioned, those she had never claimed, now represented a considerable fortune? Would she know the current value of Sun Air Lines? Upon arriving at the hospital, Martha got out hurriedly, followed by Amanda, who insisted on accompanying her. At the reception, the situation took an unexpected turn. "I'm looking for my son, Jack Thornton," Martha said to the receptionist. "I was informed he was in serious condition." The woman behind the counter checked her computer and frowned. "I'm sorry, we don't have any patient registered under that name." "There must be a mistake," insisted Martha, feeling her heart accelerate. "They called me hours ago, said he was here. Please, check again." While the receptionist performed a second search, Amanda noticed the presence of a man who was carefully observing the scene from across the lobby. He wore an impeccable suit and seemed to recognize Martha, although he kept his distance. "There is no Jack Thornton admitted to this hospital, ma'am," confirmed the receptionist. "Are you sure they told you this specific hospital?" Martha went pale, shakily taking out her mobile phone. It was an old model, barely functional. "Here I have the number that called me," she said, showing the screen. Amanda took the phone and wrote down the number. Something didn't add up in this whole situation. While Martha was discussing with the receptionist, Amanda stepped away a few paces and used her own phone to look up information about the number. Her suspicions were confirmed almost immediately. That number belonged to a disposable phone, impossible to trace. Who would have tricked Martha into traveling with such urgency, and why? When she returned to Martha, the suited man had approached them. Now she could see him clearly. He was in his 60s, with perfectly groomed salt and pepper hair and calculating eyes behind designer glasses. "Martha Thornton," said the man with a tone of false cordiality. "What a surprise to find you here after so many years." Martha turned, and her face expressed immediate recognition followed by deep distrust. "Victor Jenkins," she responded coldly. "I should have known you'd be behind this." Amanda observed the exchange with growing interest. She knew that name very well. Victor Jenkins was the current CEO of Sun Air Lines, a ruthless executive who had taken the company to new heights of profitability, albeit with questionable methods. "Behind what, dear Martha?" he asked with feigned innocence. "I just heard you were in the city and wanted to come say hello. We're almost family after all." "My son isn't here, is he?" Martha asked directly, with a mixture of relief and growing fury. "You tricked me into coming?" Victor smiled slightly, confirming her suspicions without needing words. "We needed to talk and I knew you wouldn't agree any other way," he explained with calculated calmness. "Your son is perfectly fine working on your ranch like any other day, but there are urgent matters that require your attention." Martha clenched her fists, containing her indignation. "You made me believe my only son was on the brink of death," she said with a trembling voice. What kind of person does something like that? The kind of person who understands what's at stake, replied Victor, lowering his voice. The board of directors meets tomorrow to vote on the merger with International Airlines. It's a multi-billion-dollar operation that would change the future of the company your father founded. Amanda, who had remained silent, suddenly understood the magnitude of the situation. That merger, which had been kept secret from almost all employees, would probably mean the end of Sun Airlines as an independent entity. I'm not interested, Martha replied firmly. I haven't had anything to do with the company for decades. Victor smiled smugly. That's not entirely true, and you know it. Your father's will included a clause that few know about. The shares that correspond to you, those you never claimed, include a special veto power for any decision involving the sale or merger of the company. Your father wanted to ensure that his legacy remained in American hands, always. Martha's face reflected genuine surprise. She had never read the complete will, trusting the lawyers who had handled everything after her father's passing. You're lying, she said without conviction. You know I'm not, replied Victor. That's why we need you at the board meeting tomorrow, to sign away that veto right. Amanda observed Martha, whose demeanor had changed. She was no longer the distressed woman desperately searching for her son. Now, despite her dirt-stained clothes and tired appearance, she radiated a dignity that recalled what her father must have been, a born leader. And if I refuse? Asked Martha, straightening slightly. Victor's smile disappeared. It would be most unfortunate, he replied coldly. The Sunrise Ranch is built on land that technically belongs to a subsidiary of the airline, a legal detail your father arranged decades ago that could easily be reversed. Martha went pale. The ranch was her whole life, her entire world. That's blackmail, intervened Amanda, unable to contain herself any longer. Victor looked at her with contempt. This doesn't concern you, Miss Turner. In fact, your presence here is completely inappropriate. On the contrary, replied Martha with renewed strength, Miss Turner is exactly who should be here. She'll be my witness that you were capable of inventing a family tragedy to manipulate. A tense silence settled between them. Finally, Victor regained his composure. I expect you tomorrow at 10 at the headquarters, he said, handing her a card. I've reserved a suite for you at the Empire Hotel. A car will be waiting for you, outside in 5 minutes. With those words, he walked away with a firm step, leaving Martha and Amanda in the middle of the hospital lobby. What do you plan to do? Asked Amanda when they were alone. Martha looked at the card in her hand, and then at the young executive. What I should have done a long time ago, truly understand my father's legacy. The suite at the Empire Hotel contrasted brutally with the simple adobe house that Martha had inhabited for the past 15 years. As she contemplated the nightlights of Dallas from the window of the 28th floor, she felt she was in a completely alien world. She had bathed, finally removing all the soil she had brought from her ranch, and was wearing a silk robe provided by the hotel. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Amanda Turner, who had changed her formal suit for more casual clothes. I hope I'm not disturbing you, Mrs. Thornton, said Amanda. I just wanted to make sure you were comfortable and, well, talk to you, if you'll allow me. Martha invited her in with a gesture. There was something about this young woman that inspired confidence, a refreshing honesty amid so much manipulation. You should be on your way home with your family, Martha commented. You don't have to get involved in my problems. Amanda smiled slightly as she took a seat in one of the elegant armchairs. I have my reasons, she replied. I've been working for Sun Airlines for 5 years. I started believing in the values the company proclaimed: service, tradition, American roots. But since Victor Jenkins took over as director 2 years ago, everything has changed. The merger with International Airlines would mean the end of those values. Martha observed her attentively, recognizing in her the same passion she had seen so many times in her father's eyes when he talked about his company. Why do you care so much? It's just a job, she asked, more to understand Amanda's motivations than out of disinterest. My grandfather was one of the first pilots hired by Richard, your father, explained Amanda with a certain pride. He flew for National Air Transport for 30 years. I grew up hearing his stories about how Richard created an airline when many thought it was impossible for an American entrepreneur, how he always prioritized safety over profits, how he treated his employees like family. Martha felt a wave of nostalgia. Those were exactly the qualities she remembered about her father, the same ones she had tried to bury, along with the painful memories of their estrangement. "My father was a complex man," she finally said. "He had his flaws, like everyone, but his values were unbreakable. That's why I can't just stand by while Victor destroys his legacy," affirmed Amanda with determination. "The merger isn't due to economic necessity. The airline is profitable. It's out of greed. Victor and other executives would receive million-dollar bonuses if it goes through." Martha nodded slowly. She was beginning to understand the magnitude of what was at stake. "What do you suggest I do? It's been decades since I've had anything to do with the corporate world. I don't even know if what Victor said about my veto right is true." Amanda took out her tablet and showed it to Martha. "I've verified it. It's absolutely true," she confirmed, showing her a copy of Richard Thornton's will. "Your father established that his shares, which represent 15% of the company, include a special power to veto any sale or merger. It's a clause that few know about, but it's legally binding." Martha read the document with growing amazement. Her father, despite their estrangement, had entrusted her with the final protection of his greatest creation. "I don't understand why. He gave me this power," she murmured, more to herself than to Amanda. "I always thought he died disappointed in me." "Perhaps he trusted your judgment more than you believe," suggested Amanda gently. "Records show he modified his will just a month before his death, when you had already been married for years and living your own life." A reflective silence filled the room as Martha assimilated this revelation. All these years she had believed that her father had never really accepted her life decisions, that he had never valued her choice of a simple life dedicated to the land. "Tomorrow at the meeting, Victor will try to intimidate you into giving up that right," continued Amanda. "But there's another option." "Which is?" asked Martha, intrigued. "You could exercise your right. Attend the meeting not as the woman who's going to sign a resignation, but as the legitimate heir of Richard Thornton, who comes to enforce her father's will." The idea seemed so foreign to everything Martha had been for the past decades, and yet, as she considered it, something stirred inside her, a sense of responsibility, of connection to her past that she thought she had buried along with the memories of her previous life. "I don't know if I have the strength to face someone like Victor," she confessed. "It's been so long since I worried about anything but my crops and my animals." Amanda smiled with confidence. "The woman I saw today, covered in dirt and all, standing up to Victor Jenkins in the middle of a hospital. That woman has all the necessary strength." That night, Martha slept little, memories mixed with present concerns. Her son Jack, who would surely be anxious about her absence, the ranch that represented her entire current life, her father, whose posthumous trust had placed her at this crossroads. The next morning, when Amanda arrived to accompany her to the meeting, she was surprised to see Martha. She had rejected the business suit that the hotel had provided at Victor's request. Instead, she wore her own clothes, simple, clean, dignified. Work clothes, clothes of someone who knows the value of the land. "Are you sure?" asked Amanda, although her smile indicated she approved of the choice. "If I'm going to defend my father's legacy, I'll do it being myself," replied Martha with determination. The headquarters of Sun Airlines occupied an impressive building in Dallas's financial center. The boardroom, located on the top floor, offered panoramic views of the city and the surrounding landscape. When Martha entered, accompanied by Amanda, an immediate silence fell over the dozen executives already present. Victor Jenkins, seated at the head of the huge mahogany table, could barely disguise his displeasure at seeing Martha's attire. "Mrs. Thornton, welcome," he said with a tense smile. "I see you've decided to maintain your personal style." "I'm a woman of the earth, Mr. Jenkins," she responded simply. "I don't pretend to be anything else." The executives exchanged glances, some with disdain, others with curiosity. At the back of the room, Martha noticed the presence of 3 people who didn't seem to fit with the rest. an older man in a pilot's uniform and 2 women in flight attendant uniforms. Victor followed her gaze and his smile tensed even more. Union representatives, he explained with evident annoyance. They insisted on being present as observers, an unnecessary formality, but— "I'm glad they're here," interrupted Martha, directing a respectful greeting to them that was returned with evident surprise and gratitude. The meeting began with the formal presentation of the merger proposal. One executive after another presented graphs, financial projections, and market analyses intended to demonstrate the benefits of the operation. Martha listened attentively, asking occasional questions that indicated a much greater understanding of the business than everyone expected. Finally, Victor took the floor again. "As you can see, the merger with International Airlines represents a historic opportunity," he concluded with calculated enthusiasm. "Now, before proceeding to the vote, we have a preliminary matter to resolve." All eyes turned to Martha. Mrs. Thornton must formalize her resignation of the special veto right established in Richard's will, explained Victor, while his assistant placed a document in front of Martha. "A simple signature and we can proceed." Martha looked at the document without touching it. Then she raised her eyes and slowly scanned the face of each person present in the room. "Before deciding, I'd like to ask a question," she said in a clear voice. "How many of you knew my father?" Only 3 hands went up, those of the union representatives at the back of the room. "As I imagined," nodded Martha. "Then allow me to tell you about him. Not about the businessman, but about the man." An expectant silence fell. Even Victor, impatient as he was, didn't dare interrupt her. "My father grew up on a small farm in Arizona, the son of farmers who could barely read," began Martha. "At 12 years old, he saw the first airplane of his life fly over his head and decided in that moment that someday he too would fly. Everyone told him it was impossible, that planes weren't for people like him." Her voice filled with pride that had been contained for decades. But he didn't just learn to fly. He created an airline that would carry thousands of Americans through skies that previously seemed unreachable. And he did it always keeping his feet on the ground, remembering his origins. Martha paused, looking directly at Victor. "When I decided to marry a simple man and dedicate myself to working the land, my father initially didn't understand. He came from the land and had fought all his life to rise above it. He didn't understand why I would choose to return to what he considered the beginning." The executives were now listening with genuine interest, captivated by the personal story that humanized the mythical founder. "Years later, shortly before his passing, he came to visit me at the ranch," continued Martha, her voice slightly broken with emotion. "He found me as you saw me yesterday, covered in dirt with hands roughened by working the land. I thought he would once again insist that I return to civilization. Instead, he took off his expensive suit, rolled up his sleeves, and helped me plant for hours." The memory was so vivid she could almost feel her father's presence beside her. "At you. The end of the day, he told me something I'll never forget. 'Now I understand, daughter. I fly, but you nurture. I built a company that carries people through the air, but you keep alive the connection to what really matters, the earth that sustains us all.'" Martha took the resignation document in her hands. "And that's why," she continued, looking directly at Victor, "I cannot sign this. My father entrusted me with the protection of his legacy precisely because he knew that I, like the earth, am not impressed by promises of wealth or power. The earth is not impressed with pretty words or financial projections. The earth only responds to true actions, to honest work, to genuine care." With a deliberate gesture, she tore the document in half. "As a shareholder and holder of the veto right established by Richard Thornton, I formally oppose this merger," she declared. Firmly, chaos erupted in the room. Victor, red with fury, began to threaten legal consequences. Several executives were all talking at once. The union representatives were discreetly applauding from the back. "You cannot do this," Victor finally exclaimed, pounding the table. "I remind you that your precious ranch depends on your cooperation." Martha remained serene. "Regarding that," intervened Amanda, who until then had remained silent, "we've reviewed the legal documentation for Sunrise Ranch. It turns out that Richard transferred complete ownership to his daughter 25 years ago. The airline subsidiary simply administered certain fiscal aspects, a service that can be terminated at any time without affecting the property. Victor's expression revealed he hadn't expected this counterattack. He had relied on incomplete information for his blackmail. "This doesn't end here," he threatened, regaining some of his composure. "The board of directors can challenge that archaic veto right. Times have changed." "Indeed, they have changed," agreed Martha, "and it's time for this airline to remember its roots." She turned to the rest of those present. "I'm not here just to block a merger. I'm here to remind you that Sun Airlines was born from the dream of a farmer who looked to the sky. If that essence is lost, no matter how much the numbers grow in your charts, you will have failed." To everyone's surprise, especially Victor's, several board members began nodding in agreement. "I propose," continued Martha with growing confidence, "that we form a special committee to reevaluate the strategic direction of the company. A committee that includes not only executives but also worker representatives, and if you'll allow me, myself as the voice of the founding family." The veteran pilot who was among the union representatives stood up. "As someone who flew with Richard from the early days, I completely support this proposal," he declared with barely contained emotion. "It was about time someone reminded us who we really are." The vote that followed left Victor Jenkins isolated. Martha's proposal was approved by a wide majority, and the merger was indefinitely suspended. 3 months later, Martha was back at her Sunrise Ranch, working the land as she had always done. The difference was that now, once a month, she traveled to Dallas to participate in the meetings of Sun Airlines' Strategic Committee. That day, while harvesting the first fruits of the season, she heard the familiar sound of a vehicle approaching. It was Amanda, who, after the events in the boardroom, had been promoted to Director of Social Responsibility for the airline. "I bring news," she announced enthusiastically as she approached Martha. "The Roots and Wings program you proposed has been approved. Starting next month, Sun Airlines will allocate 5% of its profits to rural development projects in all the communities where we operate." Martha smiled, offering Amanda a freshly harvested tomato. "My father would be proud," she said, looking toward the horizon where a plane crossed the sky, leaving a white trail against the intense blue. "Of all of us." While they shared the Chi Wan Chin simple meal prepared by Jack, who had enthusiastically joined the project, Martha reflected on how her life had changed in these months. She hadn't abandoned her beloved land, but she had recovered a part of her heritage that she didn't know she missed. She had found a way to honor both her own choices and her father's legacy. In the sky, another Sun Airlines plane passed over the ranch, now with a new slogan painted on its fuselage, "With roots in the earth and wings in the sky." A renewed promise that united past and future, sky and earth, just as Martha had finally united the two parts of her own identity. And when the captain, flying over Sunrise Ranch, slightly tilted the plane as a sign of respect, the passengers didn't understand why he did it. They only knew they were flying on an airline where in some mysterious way they felt at home, with their feet on the ground even at 30,000 feet in the air. Dear listeners, we hope that Martha Thornton's story has deeply moved you. This woman, with hands roughened by working the land and a heart full of dignity, teaches us that a person's true roots are never forgotten, no matter how high they fly. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special list with equally captivating stories about family legacies and reconnections with our roots. Find it here by clicking to your left. If this narrative touched sensitive fibers in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day, we bring new stories that explore the complexity of life, family ties, and the second chances that destiny sometimes offers us when we least expect them. Would you like to know more about characters like Martha, who find their strength in simplicity and authenticity? Or do you prefer stories about executives like Victor, who learn lessons in humility? Tell us in the comments what stories you'd like to hear next. Remember, as Sun Airlines' motto said, we all have roots in the earth and wings in the sky. We'll be waiting for you tomorrow with a new story that, like well-worked land, will nourish your spirit and make your emotions bloom. Until tomorrow,